Just to kind of set the ground rules a little bit, we're going to be talking mostly about work letters and related issues, some in the alterations provisions of the leases. Feel free to interrupt me if I don't see you, yell out, and I'll stop. We can have a give and take during the discussions. That's fine with me. Also, we're talking primarily about office leasing. My experience mostly is in New York City, but we've done some major leasing outside of New York City. A lot of the issues are the same, regardless of the jurisdiction. And, I mean, the practical and transactional issues. Obviously, there are legal issues different by jurisdiction. So office leasing, it's a lot of this also applies to retail leasing as well. But that's my main focus for today. So what is a work letter? A work letter is typically a document that sets forth what the landlord's responsibilities are with respect to delivering a space to a tenant. Distinguish that between an as-is deal, where the landlord just gives the tenant the space, and the tenant builds out its space, sometimes gives the tenant an allowance to build out its space. But that's a work letter. So the work letter does many things, but primarily it's to set forth what the landlord's responsibilities are. It's one of the most important parts of a lease, because what it does is for the landlord, it triggers the commencement date. Typically, the leases will provide that upon the substantial completion of the landlord's work, the commencement date occurs. We'll talk about substantial completion in a little bit, and of course, the commencement date triggers the rent. Either upon commencement date or within X number of months after the commencement date. So the work letter and the trigger the commencement date, the trigger the rent commencement date, are extremely important for the landlord. For the tenant, it determines when the tenant can move in. And then we'll talk about the pre-commencement date ability to do work, but for the most part, it will determine when the tenant can move in, when the tenant can either start its own work if it's doing additional work, addition to what the landlord is doing, or if the landlord is doing all the work that will allow the tenant to start operating on day one. That's what that will determine. That's especially important to a tenant who is in other space. The parameters and the triggers of what constitutes delivery, et cetera, are important, because if a tenant is moving from one space to another, it wants to be able to time its move properly. So if it has an expiration date of X in one space, it wants to be able to get into the other space in enough time so that's not a holdover. It's not a holdover on its existing space.